Well, good morning, everybody. It's definitely feeling like fall outside. Maybe a little hint of winter for us. A little cooler in the mornings. Numbers continue to go up. Hopefully this winter won't be as bad as they're thinking, but it's not looking particularly great on that side. And so looking at the number, we're down a bit in attendance this morning, so I imagine there might be some quarantining going on, but we'll go ahead and get this going today. Today's our last class for this Chemistry 108, and I want to take just a moment and thank every one of you for being in the class, being a chemistry major, coming to the University of Southern Mississippi. It's meant a lot to us. I've enjoyed coming to class, even though we couldn't interact as much as I would have normally liked to have been able to interact. Getting out of my office and coming down and seeing some students is definitely a bright moment in my week, and so I want to thank everybody for the opportunity for me to come in and talk with you a little bit about the topics that I care about an awful lot, and I hope you got something out of the class that you can take forward in whatever your endeavors may be and be successful. So just to a couple of news bits. I do not have an attendance assignment up yet. I will have one up after we get out of class. It may take me 20 or 30 minutes, but I'll have a little attendance assignment up, and then I'll also have the final reflection, and that will, the due times will be as normal, so nothing will change there. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we want to talk about today is an article out of CNE News, the career ladder. We've looked at a number of these. This is for Dr. Collins, Sabrina Collins. She was trained as an inorganic chemist and has done a variety of different things. And one of the things that I hope you have taken from these career ladder readings is the variety of things that a chemist or somebody who's trained as a chemist may end up doing throughout their career. So was there anything particular that you all took from this particular reading? Damien? Yep.
To do what she actually wants to do.
Yep. Absolutely. So she had several mini careers, if you will, right? She was an editor for a while. She got involved in that. Obviously, she was a graduate student. So she's done things, as they put, beyond the bench. She decided she missed working with the students. She went to an HBCU and taught there for a while. And then ultimately got back into doing things at the University of Washington with trying to recruit and diversify in the STEM fields. Diversification in STEM is a hot topic right now, and people are working hard to try to make sure that we have a diverse workforce. We know that a diverse workforce, as we learned earlier on in the semester when we read the piece from the CEO, is that companies that have diverse workforces tend to perform better. And so there's a lot of work on trying to make sure that we have a diverse STEM workforce moving as we move through the rest of this century. And so she decided to get involved in some of that kind of work, and then decided that she wanted to go back to working in the classroom. She had missed students, and so she went to the University of Worcester, or College of Worcester, which is primarily an undergraduate institution, so not as much research demand. And ultimately, she ran into a roadblock there, right? So she ended up not getting tenure. What does that mean for a faculty member if they don't get tenure? Anybody know? Does anybody even know what tenure is?
I know when you get tenure, it's like you kind of certified, but certified might not the word, but your job is safe basically.
Yeah, so, well, it's as safe as one can imagine. There is no such thing as a guaranteed job when you have tenure. Theoretically, although I've never seen this happen, you can be tenured, you can have your job, but you're not guaranteed a paycheck at many institutions. So it's not like you have a job for life that's just guaranteed no matter what you do. But it is a level of security that most jobs and positions don't have. And so when an assistant professor is hired, that would be your first job as a professor. I came here in 2004 as an assistant professor. You're on a probationary period for about 5 years. And during that time, your colleagues evaluate you. They evaluate you based on your teaching, the service that you do, but also very significantly on the research that you conduct. How many graduate students have you mentored? How many of them have graduated? How many grants did you get funded so that you could do your work? How many publications did you publish? All of that stuff goes into what we call your tenure packet, and that gets reviewed in your fifth year. And then tenure is granted in the 6th year or denied in the 6th year. And your colleagues look at that packet and determine whether or not you have merited the guidelines for a tenured position. And then once you're tenured, again, you do have a level of security. I don't wake up every morning worrying about losing my job because I am tenured. But like I said, it's not a 100% guarantee of a position. There are things you can do to lose your tenure. But the reason that faculty are tenured is to ensure that we can conduct our studies and our teaching without undue political interference. That's the whole point of tenure. The point of tenure isn't to grant you a lifetime job. The point is so that you can teach, you can do research without undue political interference. So many years ago, professors, hundreds of years ago, professors would be persecuted for their teaching and for the work that they did. And so that's really where tenure comes in. So as long as I'm staying within the guidelines and the legal law, I can come in and teach you all as I see fit. I am not burdened by my boss. I am not burdened by the governor. I am not burdened by the taxpayers of the state of Mississippi when I come in and teach you all. I can come in and teach you any way that I see as appropriate. Does that mean I can come in and talk about just anything I want? Absolutely not. I have to stay within the bounds of my discipline. I have to be factual. But if I feel like standing up here and talking to you is the best way to teach, nobody else can tell me otherwise. Okay? I'm the expert in my field. I have the ability to do that. Likewise, when I go into my laboratory, if there's a particular topic that I want to research, I am free to research that topic. I am free to publish on that topic. That does not mean I can do just anything in the world and get away with it. I have to do things scientifically, methodically, and with integrity. I can't do fraud, I can't cheat, I can't lie, I can't steal. I can't do any of those types of things that you would typically think of somebody getting terminated from their job for. And we can get terminated for those things as well. So it's not a 100% guarantee of a job. It just means that I have, as a scholar, I have the ability to conduct my research and teach as I see fit without undue political interference. Now, that doesn't mean that politics can't come into things. Obviously, people control the budget, right? So it's hard to do research without money. So there is some give and take and control in various things. But nonetheless, it is a privilege as a professor to be able to be granted tenure. And to be denied tenure is actually a significant blow to one's career. And so Dr. Collins experienced that. And fortunately, I have never experienced that. And I hope to never experience such a thing. But, once you have merited tenure, then you have a little more latitude in doing a variety of things. So It is a privilege to hold tenure, and it is also comes with a great deal of responsibility. So I want you all to know that the professors that you have who are tenured have earned that distinction, and it means something, and it is an important part of the professorate as we know it. So if you're thinking about going into academia, it's something that you want to think about. Not all universities grant tenure. For example, if you attended the talk that Dr. Malia gave a few weeks ago, he's at Georgia Gwinnett College. Georgia Gwinnett College does not tenure their faculty. They have 5-year contracts. And so places do this differently, but most state universities do grant tenure, and it is a benefit, it is a perk, and it is something that I think you have to take into account if you're thinking about going in the academic realm. So, it is something to think about. But nonetheless, after she was denied tenure, she ended up continuing on into other areas. Right, so now she's at the center, or the STEM Center at the Lawrence Technological University, and she continues to work on her diversity work. And so, what I hope you got from all of these career ladder readings throughout the semester is that you can change directions quite frequently in your career. In any career, that's possible, but especially in chemistry. You might find yourself working in policy and in government. You might find yourself working in a traditional laboratory setting. You might find yourself working in a pharmaceutical company. You might find yourself working in the oil industry. You might find yourself working in manufacturing. You might find yourself working in the environmental industry. So there are a lot of opportunities for folks with chemistry training. So chemistry, biochemistry, molecular techniques, polymer science, all of those types of chemically related sciences have an awful lot of career opportunities. And so if you end up being somewhat like me, where after so long you kind of get bored with something and you want to switch directions, it's fairly easy to do. And I've done that here. My career ladder, I started off as an assistant professor. I became an associate professor after 5 or 6 years. I then became an associate dean, and now I'm an associate provost. I'm working within the same organization that I've always been at. I haven't had to move around, but you can change a variety of different directions fairly easily with a chemistry degree. Anything else that struck home about this particular reading? No? Okay. The last reading this semester from CNE News is the 2020 Heroes of Chemistry. So the ACS does this where they have individuals or companies that they announce as heroes of chemistry each year. This year they recognized a few here. So we had AST Products for their Lubrimatrix surface treatment technology. Anybody take anything from that? What was this about? Why is this important? Damien?
They made like matrix like for with cataract surgery
Mm-hmm.
in order like to fix like the lens in the eye to help it be smooth, no scratches, and just work right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they were dealing with lens replacement kind of stuff, cataract replacement. So it's a surface treatment to help minimize damage during these types of procedures. Everybody, with our extended life expectancies that we cherish today, we're living longer than people have lived in the past, and by quite a bit. Certain parts just tend to wear out, and the eyes are one of them. And so most people in this room will live long enough to develop cataracts at some point. And these types of technologies are going to be very, very important. And obviously for you all, there will be even better technologies by the time this becomes an issue for you. But, cataracts are that film that develops, that thickening film that develops on the eyes that gets removed. Usually they shave it off and it may replace the lens of your eye. My father went through this just a couple of years ago. So both of the lenses in his eye are artificial. His cataracts were removed. and you have to wear a patch for a while, and you have to stay out of the sunlight and stuff. But technologies like this are becoming more and more commonplace as we age. And I think what you'll find is that a lot of drug companies are getting more and more involved in drugs related to aging. As we become an aging population, we're going to need more and more technologies and pharmaceuticals and things that chemistry really can contribute to improve the quality of life when one ages. It wasn't too many years ago, I remember as a young kid, when somebody turned 50 or 60 years old, they kind of looked old. That's not the case anymore. People don't, if you were to look at my father's 70, almost 71, he looks and functions a lot better than somebody who was probably in their mid-60s back when I was a kid. He still runs the farm. He still does all the stuff he wants to do every day. But as a result, he's got, 2 replaced knees, and he's got artificial lenses in his eyes. And so, but those types of things are going to become more and more important. And then if it's something that interests you, I think there's going to be a huge future in the biotechnology, biochemistry, and chemistry fields for people that work on age-related diseases, age-related issues. Not everything is a disease, obviously. But there's going to be, I think, a big market for that for some time to come as a population we continue to age. DuPont Electronics was one, and this was one where they are working on technologies that are important for the fabrication of electronic devices. I'm not terribly knowledgeable in that area, so we'll just skip over that one real quick. DuPont also appeared again in the Chemistry Heroes. You will see DuPont being on this list quite a bit. DuPont, of course, is a big multinational company, or it's in many nations. It's actually a U.S. company, but they do an awful lot of stuff with chemistry and have made a lot of inroads over the decades in terms of new technologies. But DuPont Water Solutions for this film tech nanofiltration membrane. Why is water purification an issue? This one's a softball. Why is water purification an issue?
It's because, we use it so much, like every day. And like factories and companies use it, like they pollute the water, and there's no way to get that water
That's right.
unpolluted. So with this new filtration, there's a way to reuse that water. So places like that aren't using as much water as they are. Like we're not using as much water we use. We just recycle it over and over and help like other countries and stuff.
All water that you all drink, every one of us has to have so much water a day. It's a necessary component of life. Every drop of water that you drink has been drunk by someone else or something else in the past, multiple times. All water is recycled that we have on the earth. It is a precious resource. The earth is covered quite drastically with water, but very little of it is actually consumable by humans. I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's less than 2% or something of all the earth's water is drinkable by humans. And so you can't just go down to the Gulf and stick a straw in and drink the water, right? As populations increase, the demand on our limited drinkable water supplies have stressed those water supplies. Places that depend on aquifers for clean drinking water, those aquifers are being depleted because we're pulling water out of them faster than they are getting refilled. And so finding ways and technologies that we can still supply the world's needs with drinkable water are important. And so this nanofiltration membrane, I think, is from what I read on it, it seems like a very interesting technology to be able to selectively remove things and leave some things in the water is kind of an important thing. So if you think about it, you don't want to drink just 100% pure water. You want to have some electrolytes in there, but you certainly don't want things like pesticides and antibiotics and heavy metals and all of those types of things that can cause damage. And so these membranes are a little more selective than a reverse osmosis system, which removes pretty much everything. So I think this is an interesting technology that's going to have a lot of implications for water accessibility, not only in the developed world, but also in the developing world, where there is a number of water supplies that are just not consumable. So I thought that was an interesting technology. And then Johnson & Johnson made the last one of the list with their Certero drug. So you can see the drug here. For those of you who are or have had some organic chemistry, you might be able to recognize some of the functional groups, as we call them, in this molecule. This is a fairly typical size for what we call a small molecule drug. It does have what we call molecular complexity that has to be taken into account. Don't worry too much about the structure right now, but when I look at a structure like this, I see challenges. I see things that make me interested in how could we make such a molecule. Because it's not important, well, it is important about how all the atoms are connected, but it's also very important how those atoms are pointed in space. Okay? The shape, the absolute shape of that molecule is very, very important. If you switch some of the atoms around in terms of how they point, it no longer functions the way that you want. This happens to be useful for the multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. Believe it or not, tuberculosis is starting to find a little bit of an increase, not only in the developing world, but in the developed world. And so TB, while it's not the disease that you may have read about in some books that ravaged the countrysides years ago, it is making a comeback. And it is making a comeback because it has developed some drug resistance. And so coming up with new drugs to attack things like tuberculosis is always going to be something that we have to be researching on. You've probably heard of antibiotic resistance. You've probably heard of other types of resistance in terms of bug resistance, if you will. That's a real problem. There are health officials who are very, very concerned about the status of our arsenal, as they like to say, for fighting certain microbes. And if you read some of the books on that, we're really just a few steps away from another type of a pandemic that could be very, very serious. Not a viral one, but one that deals with different strains of bacteria that are drug resistant. You know, when I was a kid, you got sick, you went to the doctor, you got a shot of penicillin. Many of you have probably never had penicillin because they have held that in reserve a lot these days because the penicillin drugs are considered sometimes the last line of defense. And they're trying to keep the microbes, if you will, from gaining penicillin resistance. So there's a lot of interest in this type of thing. If you ended up working in a pharmaceutical company where you were working on drugs like this, you would truly be in an interdisciplinary research group. You would be working as a chemist or a biochemist, but you would also be working with molecular biologists, microbiologists. You would be working with information specialists who can do the computer modeling of how the drug interacts with the cell surface of the microbe, for example. And you would be part of an exciting research team trying to develop a molecule that can selectively attack the bad cells or the bad players, if you will, and leave the good stuff alone. So that's always going to be an area of, I think, pretty heavy research for the foreseeable future, is trying to find additional molecules that can combat drug-resistant microbes. It's definitely a concern for the health and well-being of the globe, really, to not put too fine a point on it. All right, so now we've got a couple of things from the chemistry book. So our last two readings from the chemistry book. And these are two of my favorite things that I talk about when I teach organic chemistry. Wohler's urea synthesis. Of course, this happened many, many years ago now, but this was the experiment that disproved the vitalist theory. Okay, so there used to be this theory that organic molecules, as they thought of them back then, could only be derived from living things. That there was some sort of vital force that was responsible for the making of those particular molecules in living systems. Okay? Now, and everybody was kind of happy with that. You know, if you needed urea for something, and urea is used in a variety of different things, you actually had to collect that from a living thing, and you got it from their urine. So you would collect urine, you would boil it down, and you would get urea crystals. You could then take that urea and you could do a variety of different things with it. Okay? Frederick Wohler, however, accidentally, although this piece makes it sound like he intentionally did it, but in large part he did this by accident. He heated some inorganic salts. So inorganic is obviously the opposite of organic. And you can, for just basic purposes right now, you can consider inorganic to be rocks. Okay? So he basically took these inorganic substances and he boiled them in water. And he noted that it started to smell familiar, kind of like urine. Okay? I know that's not a pleasant thing to say, but that's actually what happened. What he recognized was that he took these things that came from inorganic material, non-living, boiled them in water, and made something that they felt could only be made in a living creature through a kidney. Okay, and so this was the experiment that disproved the vitalistic theory. Okay, that there was some vital force responsible for the synthesis of these molecules. Okay, so we now know that chemistry is responsible for the synthesis of these types of molecules, right? And so we had evidence that we could, in fact, take things that nature has given us in the form of inorganic materials, and we can convert them into other molecules. And so, for a lot of people, this is actually the quintessential experiment that shows that we can actually make things from other things very, very efficiently. And so, very, very important experiment in the history of chemistry. Okay. So you might read in a variety of popular media, right, that this vitamin C or this vitamin E is better for you because it came from the natural source. Okay, it's going to be better for you than this man-made material. If those two molecules are purified to their purest extent, you cannot distinguish the man-made material from the natural material, with one exception, and that's carbon-14 content. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, we can use carbon-14 to radiodate materials. Carbon-14 is radioactive. Things that are made in nature will have a small percentage of carbon-14 incorporated into them, whereas things that are man-made will not. And so that's really the only big difference. Why is that? That is because in the upper atmosphere, nitrogen gas gets bombarded with UV radiation from the sun. And that process converts the nitrogen into carbon-14 to a small extent. That carbon-14 gets oxidized in the atmosphere to carbon dioxide, which contains carbon-14. What happens to carbon dioxide as it comes down here closer to the Earth? What happens to that carbon dioxide? Does it just float around, or does it get incorporated into other things? That's right. So you got photosynthesis, right? So plants take in carbon dioxide. They convert that carbon source into things that they need, like sugars, right? They expel oxygen. That's where we get a lot of our oxygen. And in that process, that small amount of carbon-14 is going to be incorporated into that plant. Now what happens to the plant? An animal comes along and eats it. That carbon-14 then gets incorporated into that animal. Then what happens to that little animal? Well, bigger animals eat it, right? And so you can see that carbon-14 will always be present in small amounts in living things. That's why we can carbon date bones, right? We know that carbon-14 radio decays over time, and we can use that decay rate to determine when those bones were placed into the ground, basically, if you will. Okay, so we can use carbon-14 dating to do that kind of work. When we take stuff from oil has a lot of carbon in it, but it has been in the ground for so many years that all of its carbon-14 is depleted. It's all been decayed. And so when we make things out of oil, like medicines and molecules, that's how we can tell that it's man-made, because it contains no carbon-14. Okay? That's one way in which we can tell if athletes have actually taken anabolic steroids, right? Because you can take steroids that are exactly the same thing as the steroids your body makes, but we can tell the difference because the man-made ones have no carbon-14. The ones that your body makes will have a small amount of carbon-14, and so you can use that isotope difference to determine the carbon-14 content. Those are crystals of urea, by the way. They make nice little, they're not blue, it's just on a blue background, but the crystals are white, and nice pretty little crystals. But this was a simple experiment that was done back in the 1800s, and really set the ground for modern chemistry as we know it. The last topic that I want to talk about is chirality. This is my favorite of all favorites when I teach organic chemistry. Okay, chirality is a topic that when you all get into organic, I think you'll either love it or you'll hate it. And I love it because putting atoms together is one thing. Putting them together to where one atom is sticking out towards you and one's going away from you and one's in the plane and that's a very challenging problem. Nature knows how to do that very, very well, and us as humans, we're just figuring out over the last 20 or 30 years how to really do it well. But it turns out to be a very, very important concept. And chirality literally means handedness. Are my hands the same? Is my right hand and my left hand the same thing? I have a palm. I have a thumb that's connected to that palm. I have an index finger, a middle finger, so on and so forth, right? They're connected the same, but are they the same? Is my right hand the same as my left hand? It is not. When I take my hands, you'll see that they are mirror images of one another. My right hand is like holding up, if I held it up into a mirror, what would I see? I would see my left hand in the mirror, right? So they are mirror images, but they are not the same. I can't overlay one on the other and have the same thing, right? They are different. This is a very, very important concept in chemistry. It is extremely important in drugs. So for example, if you've ever taken naproxen, which is a leave, okay, it is a molecule that has chirality. Not all molecules have it. It has a right hand and it has a left-handed version. If I gave you a leave that contained both right and left-handed versions, it would destroy your liver. You would die. Okay? But they're able to make it to where it's just the right-handed molecule. And when they give that to you, your body treats that differently than it would the left-handed molecule. Okay? So this idea of chirality is very, very important. Obviously, you don't want to get a headache, take a drug, and die. Right? Nobody wants to do that. That's the wrong way to cure a headache. Right? And so chemists have to be able to make that molecule and purify it such that you only have the right-handed version of that molecule being administered. The same thing is true for other illicit drugs that you might be familiar with. So for example, methamphetamine is chiral. There is a right-handed version and there is a left-handed version. If you were to buy that drug on the street, you get a mixture of both. Okay? only one of those gives the high. The other one actually has a legitimate pharmaceutical use. Okay? So if you've ever used a Vicks Vapo inhaler, you know, if you get hay fever and such, and you get the Vicks Vapo inhaler and you use that to clear your sinuses, you have actually taken methamphetamine. There is a small amount of what's called lev, which means levratory, which means left-handed, basically. Okay? Methamphetamine. It does not cause a high. It actually helps your passageways open up. But it is connected. All the atoms are connected exactly the same, except how they're pointing in space. And that makes a big difference, right? Obviously, Vicks Vapo inhalers can't give you the other one. That would be illegal, right? But they can give you this one. You can then take it, inhale it, open up your passageways. You don't get high, and you don't have any of the side effects that come with meth usage. So this is a very, very important concept, and there's a lot of Nobel Prizes that have been given in chemistry for people who have figured out not only how to connect the atoms together, but how to connect them together to where they point in the right directions in space. And it is still a problem that we're trying to overcome every day, because as we get more and more complicated structures, how the atoms point in 3 dimensions makes a big difference. I like to think of chirality as the architecture of chemistry. So if you like architecture, if you like drawing buildings and that kind of stuff, this is the topic that you're really going to enjoy. If you liked playing with Tinker Toys and Legos, this is the kind of topic in chemistry you should enjoy, because it's all about structure, and structure leads to function. It's very, very important that you all understand that. So going forward in your chemistry, there were a few things that we talked about in this class that I said were very, very important. One was acids and bases. That's extraordinarily important. But the other one is chirality. Okay? Chirality is extremely important because that leads to the structure of the molecules that give rise to all the functions that we have. So this was one that I wanted to show you. And I think the experiment that Louis Pasteur did back, over 100 years ago now, really set the stage for understanding that molecules could have these different forms, as they called them at the time. They really didn't completely understand the structure, but he was able to look at these tartaric acid samples and realized that the crystals looked differently. And then when he separated those crystals out, they behaved differently with this thing called plane polarized light. And you'll learn more about that when you get into organic. So we won't spend a whole lot of time there. But it is one of my favorite topics. If you're thinking about doing research with me later on, I do take a student or two every now and then. I'm not going to do a big slideshow, but everything that I do is based on chirality. So we are always interested in how can we make a molecule that has the groups that are attached to a particular carbon atom pointing in the right directions in space. And so in my group, we actually use enzymes from pig livers to do that for us, to help us do that chemistry. And so we do have a little bit of a biobend in my lab. So for those of you who are in biochemistry that might be thinking in a couple of years about doing some organic kind of research, please note that we do research that borders both traditional organic and biological type chemistry. Okay. That is the end of all of the official stuff that we had to go through. The other thing that I want to talk to you a little bit about before we go, next week is what for you all? Thanksgiving. How many are glad that Thanksgiving's finally here? Right? Everybody's raising their hand. Absolutely. Things are a little different this year, obviously, because of COVID, but not just COVID, but also because of how we're doing your schedule. In semesters past, we would be in class up through Wednesday. We would break for Thanksgiving. We would come back. We would let you get into the groove a little bit again, and then we would have, in early December, we would have our finals week. Finals week is essentially when you come back from Thanksgiving, right? And all of that is going to be, I think most of it is going to be virtual. We are not going to have a final in this class, so you don't need to worry about that. However, I will post something at some point during the week of Thanksgiving for you all to view on your own. But we're not going to have an exam. I want you to spend your time focusing on your other courses. It is going to be very, very important for you to keep your studies up during the Thanksgiving break. Coming back after Thanksgiving, a week of just being completely tuned out from your studies is going to create some stress for you all, okay? You need to deal with that stress by every day during Thanksgiving, and I know it doesn't sound fun, but you need to devote a little bit of time to just staying fresh with your material. I'm not saying you have to, at 8 o'clock in the morning, pick up a book and read till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That's not what I'm saying, but don't let yourself get cold, okay? Coming back that Monday and getting started in your exams, it will be a shock to your system if you haven't exercised a little bit, if you will, okay? So it's very, very important. And that is just not present like we had in the past, where you had an opportunity to come back, get back in the groove, and get started, okay? So it's really going to be up to you to keep engaged with your material. I would wager that most of your professors would be happy to answer questions, maybe not on Thanksgiving Day, okay, but during the rest of the week. If you have questions, feel free to email them. If you have questions about anything, feel free to email me. Just make sure you go over your notes some during the break, work a few practice problems, whatever the case may be. Dedicate a little bit of time every day to staying fresh. And it's going to be easy for you to not do that. So please schedule it on your schedule. Do it a couple of times a day. If you're sitting there watching football on Thanksgiving Day and a commercial comes up, pick up your notes, look at your notes. Just stay fresh, okay? I don't want you to come back and struggle with final exams simply because you took an entire week and didn't stay fresh. I know that doesn't sound fun, but I think it is going to be the key to minimizing your stress during exams week, okay? What techniques might you use to minimize stress during exam week? Anybody got any ideas? Damien?
If you can, like, I know my exams, I have like ranked like a 2 or 3 days I could take it. I was like, and I only have 3 finals because my classes don't have them. But I do just one final each day, so I can just focus on that one thing. And if I have multiple finals on the day, I would just do one in the morning, take like a decent break, and then one in the afternoon after I break and study for it.
Okay. Any other possibilities? Anything else anybody can think of? The number one way to minimize your stress in academia is to be prepared. Okay? That's what I'm talking about for Thanksgiving. Make sure you're prepared coming into Monday after Thanksgiving. Okay? Very, very important. Study your notes, study your material, work your problems. Okay? Allow yourself some time to relax and decompress as well. It's going to be also very important. The number one killer that I've seen for most college students is the cram before the exam method. It rarely works. I know many of you think it works. I know many of you think you got through high school doing it. But I can guarantee you, for the most part, it does not work. It causes a lot of stress. You lose a lot of sleep, and then you're not prepared and well rested the day of the exam. So pace yourself. Know when your exams are going to be. That's very, very important. Before we leave for the break, you need to know each and every day and time that your exams are going to be. If you do not know that now, you need to reach out to your professors, because that's going to be a huge stress. Imagine waking up and realizing that you got an exam in an hour that you didn't know about or you've forgotten about. And I know that all sounds maybe a little silly, but believe me, I've seen it. I've seen people run into my organic exam 5 minutes late because they had forgotten. They didn't put it on their calendar. and then they were flustered. They had already set themselves up for a struggle. Avoid all that at all costs, okay? All right, well, it's been a real pleasure teaching everybody, and I hope you enjoyed the semester. And if I can help you in any way moving forward, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You all can exit out the back as normal, and have a good Thanksgiving, everyone.